4 months after the war in Tigray, Amnesty International, a movement of 10 million people which mobilized the humanity in everyone and campaigns for change, released a 25-page report under the title The Massacre in Axum. The report contains about 7 chapters, namely: first, an executive summary; second, indiscriminate shelling and killings of suspected TPLF members; third, the massacre; fourth, the mass detentions and threats; fifth, burials; sixth, looting, hunger and thirst; and seventh, conclusions and recommendations. Hello and welcome. This is Eastern Media and the program is Focus. I am Shumalis Marasa Gabra Mikhail, and today we will briefly look into this report by Amnesty International. Please stay with the program. The overview part starts with a satellite image of the key locations of the city of Axum alongside the areas where major damage were taking place. And then it says between 19th and 29th November 2020, Eritrean troops operating in the Ethiopian city of Axum, Tigray, committed a series of human rights and humanitarian law violations, including killings of hundreds of civilians. According to the report, in over an approximately 24-hour period, in the 28th and 29th November, Eritrean soldiers deliberately shot civilians on the street and carried out systemic house-to-house search, extrajudicially executing men and boys. The massacre was carried out in retaliation for an earlier attack by a small number of local militiamen joined by local residents armed with sticks and stones. In the immediate aftermath of the massacre, Eritrean troops shot at those who thought to remove bodies from the streets, but later allowed residents to collect the bodies and bury them. Men from the community led the collective effort, pulling carts piled for the bodies of relatives, friends, neighbors, and strangers, which they brought to churches across the city for burial, many in mass graves. The massacre was the culmination of a wave of violations carried out since the 19th of November, when Eritrean and Ethiopian forces entered Axum together after indiscriminately shelling the city and firing at those who tried to flee. Witnesses say that Eritrean forces, in taking over the town, carried out extrajudicial executions and engaged in widespread looting. Following the 28th and 29th November massacre, Eritrean forces detained hundreds of residents and threatened renewed killings in the event of new resistance. Looting by Eritrean soldiers escalated, and insecurity and hunger led many residents to flee. The events in Axum, a city located on the road linking Shire to Adwa, some 187 kilometers north of Mekelle, the capital of Tigray regional state, occurred during the ongoing armed conflict between Ethiopia's federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF). In waging war against the TPLF, the ENDF has rallied on support of special forces and militias from the Amhara region, which borders on Tigray, and on the Eritrean Defense Force. The Ethiopian authorities and Eritrean authorities have made contradictory statements regarding the involvement of Eritrean troops in the Tigray conflict, with some high-ranking officials denying their presence but others acknowledging it. In this briefing, Amnesty International documents how the Eritrean military is responsible for serious violations against Tigrayan civilians in Axum. It concludes that the indiscriminate shelling of Axum by Ethiopian and Eritrean troops may amount to war crimes, and that the mass execution of Axum civilians by Eritrean troops may amount to crimes against humanity. Amnesty International calls for an international investigation into the event in Axum and for the Ethiopian government to grant full and unimpeded access to humanitarian, human rights, and media organizations. This briefing is based on 11 days of research by Amnesty International at the Refugee Reception Center in Hamdayet, Eastern Sudan in January 2021, as well as on numerous phone interviews with witnesses in Axum. In all, Amnesty International interviewed 41 witnesses and survivors of the massacre, all ethnic Tigrayans, as well as 20 others with knowledge relevant to the situation. Given security concerns of interviews, all of their names have been omitted. On the 18th of February, Amnesty International shared the research finding presented in this briefing with Ambassador Redwan Hussein, Ethiopia's State Minister for Foreign Affairs and spokesperson of the Emergency Task Force in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but had not received a response at the time of writing. In the second part of the report, Amnesty International, among others, has indicated that the federal government shelled the city indiscriminately. Ethiopian and Eritrean military forces also began firing artillery on the city from the west, the direction from which they advanced. According to one eyewitness who recalled that the shelling continued for quite some time, he said there was not any army or forces inside the city at that time, but they shelled the people. That was very scary, shelling and gunfire. Numerous residents described the terror that took hold of the city. A man recalled, "We were really scared because the sound was really huge. We never heard anything like that. And we saw the shells falling on buildings and houses." A woman also recalled, "I was shocked and saw everyone shocked and scared of what happened. Everyone ran away, leaving shops, markets, offices," said one woman. The accounts of other numerous residents were also included in this section of the report. The next chapter is about the massacre. This section first highlights the fighting taking place on the 28th of November. By the way, our viewers, a few days after this incident, we have heard the government of Ethiopia, including the social affairs advisor to Prime Minister Daniel Kibret, stating that the intention of government forces was to make everything work out for the celebration of the annual Axum Sion, Saint Mary of Zion. However, the report has the following to say regarding the incident on the ground. The group of assailants was reportedly small. Witnesses said they saw perhaps 50 to 80 men armed with guns, but the offensive received local support. Some local youth rallied, joining the fight with improvised weapons such as knives, sticks, and stones. Others brought food to the fighters, while an even larger number cheered in support. The Eritrean forces responded by firing automatic weapons and precision rifles. Others describe a dramatic imbalance between the two sides. A 26-year-old man who participated in the attack said, "We expected that TPLF soldiers might come fight the Eritrean but it wasn't them. We heard it was some militiamen. We wanted to protect our city, so we attempted to defend it, especially from Eritrean soldiers. The Eritrean soldiers were organized. They knew how to shoot. They had radios communications. Even before we started fighting with them, they killed with snipers and brain machine gun. I didn't have gun, just a stick." A 22-year-old man who thought to bring food to the fighters described a similar scene. The Eritrean soldiers were trained, but the young residents didn't even know how to shoot. After that, a lot of the fighters started running away and dropped their weapons. In this same section, it is well elaborated regarding deliberate targeting of civilians. It says, from about 3 to 4 p.m., lines of Eritrean trucks and tanks reportedly entered the city from the east. Their numbers bolstered by the new arrivals. Eritrean soldiers went on a rampage, shooting at civilian men and youth who were out of the streets attempting to flee in panic. The killing, which one witness said began around 4 p.m., was carried out on a large scale and continued until the evening. Kamfa, name changed, a university professor, described the beginning of the massacre. Starting at 2 p.m., The Eritrean soldiers started going home to home and killing men. When I heard that they were killing men, I ran out of city. Kifli, name changed again, age 26, told Amnesty International about killings he witnessed on the city's main street. I saw Eritrean soldiers killing the youth who were on the street. He recalled, I was on the second floor of a building and watched through the window the Eritrean killing the youth on the street. Accounts of this sort were reported and elaborated in many details in this section, where we invite you all to read the entire report. The reports are disturbing, but as to the denial by the Ethiopian and Eritrean government regarding the presence of the Eritrean forces, Amnesty has the following to say. Identifying the perpetrators. Axum residents whom Amnesty International interviewed had no difficulty identifying the perpetrators as Eritrean soldiers. They described several telltale signs. First, Eritrean soldiers often rode in trucks whose license plates read Eritrea. Most wore a uniform that witnesses described a beige or a mix of green and beige, easily distinguishable from that of the Ethiopian soldiers. Some Eritrean soldiers, interviews said, wore the uniform of Ethiopian army but could be easily be identified because they wore plastic shoes known as Congo Chama or Shida, which are popular in Eritrea. Ethiopian soldiers, on the other hand, wore standard issue boots. Cultural clues further help people identify the perpetrators as Eritreans. 3 scars on each temple near the eye mark some of the soldiers as Beni Amer, an ethnic group that straddles Sudan and Eritrea but is absent from Ethiopia. While Ethiopian soldiers spoke Amharic, Eritrean soldiers spoke Arabic or Tigrinya, a language spoken by both Tigray people and Eritreans. Although the language is basically the same in both regions, the Tigrinya that Eritrean soldiers speak is a distinctive dialect with its own words and accent. According to the report, attacks were also made on the people who were collecting bodies. Then comes the fourth part of the report, where mass detentions and threats are reported in more details. Eritrean soldiers also rounded up hundreds, if not thousands, of male residents in different parts of the city on the 29th of November. The men who were detained said soldiers beat and abused them and robbed them of their belongings, jackets, belts, shoes, and money. The soldiers also warned detainees that there would be renewed killings should they encounter any resistance. A 26-year-old described his detention. Eritrean soldiers gathered us. We went, maybe 500 people, only men. They put us in a big hole in the ground. The foundations of an unfinished building located on the eastern entrance to the city. There were also other eyewitness accounts in this section, alongside a reference to the international humanitarian law. On the next part, the report talks about burials. Here is how the first paragraph in the section reads: finding the dead. As people come out of hiding and left their homes on the 29th and 30th November, the scale of the killing became obvious to all. Those who ventured out saw dozens of dead and injured people scattered around their neighborhoods, often recognizing familiar faces. The people Amnesty International interviewed provided the names of well over 200 people they knew who were killed on the 28th and 29th November. They said that all the victims were unarmed and that the overwhelming majority of them were men. Amnesty International was unable to calculate the massacre's precise death toll, but estimates that hundreds of people were killed. However, as it was done in the previous sections, this part is also adequately substantiated by eye accounts who took part and witnessed the incidents from the beginning to the end. Here is how one of the eyewitnesses, a man, recalled the event. Around the Queen Sheba place, I saw a lot of dead bodies and 10 farmers who had been injured by weapons. One of them, part of his ball was coming out. They were men aged 40 to 45 to 50. By that time, there was no hospital. Qadist Mariam Hospital had not been looted, but there were no doctors or nurses. The referral hospital had been looted. We couldn't take these people to the hospital, so we took them home. Also, on issues pertaining to the collection of the dead, the report has the following to say. On request of local elders, Ethiopian soldiers gave permission for people to bury the dead in the late afternoon on the 29th of November. Gathering the bodies and carrying out the funerals took days. Most of the dead appear to have been buried on the 13th of November, but witnesses said that people found many additional bodies in the days that followed. The surviving men took up the task of carrying the dead to the town's churches. Amnesty International spoke to 9 men who took part in the process, as well as the 8 who witnessed it. The bodies were brought to the Arbatu Insisa Church next to Axum Sion St. Mary Church, as well as St. Michael, Abuna Aragawi, Ndagabur, Abab and Eluan, and Nda Jesus or Jesus Church. On this same burial note, the report has come up, among other, an eyewitness account of St. Sion Mariam's celebration nude. 30 November marked the anniversary of St. Mary, a major celebration in Axum, which on another year would have drawn the faithful from across Ethiopia and tourists from around the world. In light of the exceptional circumstances, the celebrations were cancelled. It was deeply sad, said one woman. There were funerals around the church, separate ceremonies. It wasn't the usual celebration. The sixth part of the report was regarding looting, hunger, and thirst. In addition to the killings and the detentions, Eritrean soldiers looted Axum systematically and on a massive scale, leaving residents without food or drink. All of the refugees was interviewed spoke of the looting and its terrible impact on daily life. They said that the looting began as soon as Eritrean forces entered the town on the 19th of November, but that it escalated in the wake of the 28th and 29th of November massacre. One man said that on the 29th of November, Eritrean soldiers came to his brother's house and began to loot. We told Ethiopian soldiers and they tried to help us and asked them to stop. The Eritrean soldier said, "Hey, you donkey, it's none of your business." They took the TV, a jeep, the fridge, 6 mattresses, all the groceries and cooking oil, butter, tape, flour, the furniture of the kitchen cabinet itself, clothes, the beers in the fridge, the water pump, and the laptop. They damaged the door. They took all this in the Mercedes truck. The scale of the looting made life difficult for Axum residents, for whom electricity, phone, networks, and public service had already been cut since the beginning of the conflict in early November. The lack of food and water drove many to leave the town. In conclusion, the report noted that by all accounts, the Eritrean military's killings of hundreds of civilians in Axum on the 28th and 29th November was coordinated and systematic. Its aim was to terrorize the population into submission, as evidenced by the military's mass detention of residents on the 29th November and soldiers' threats to resume wanton killings in the event of resistance. These killings, as well as other extrajudicial executions that preceded them, the deadly indiscriminate shelling of Axum and the widespread looting of property may amount to war crimes. The systematic killings of hundreds of civilians by Eritrean forces on the 28th and 29th November may also constitute crimes against humanity. The survivors of Axum massacre were robbed of their relatives, their friends and their neighbors without some measures of accountability for the grievous violations that they have endured. Such crimes are likely to continue. Amnesty International calls for UN-led investigation into these events and for the Ethiopian government to cooperate fully with it, including by facilitating unfettered access to the UN investigators. Besides examining events in Axum, the investigation should look into the totality of the war crimes and crimes against humanity allegedly committed in the context of the conflict in Tigray since the 4th of November 2020, with a view to ensuring accountability for suspected perpetrators and reparations for the victims and survivors. In addition, we call upon the Ethiopian authorities to stop the further commission of human rights and humanitarian law violations, including indiscriminate shelling and aerial bombardments and deliberate attacks on civilians. Ensure unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray. Amnesty International also urges the African Union, the European Union, the United States, and the United Nations to encourage the Ethiopian authorities to implement the above recommendations. The report concludes. Well, with that, we come to the end of the program for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with yet another program. Thank you, and have a good one.